Welcome to the Dream Architect channel. Today we will embark on a quiet recollection of a first encounter, one that happened where maps end and eternity begins. We will not speak of invasions or battles that stir the blood. Instead, we will immerse ourselves in a hypnotic tapestry of 100 moments that changed everything. This is the story of how humanity first gazed into the mirror of the cosmos and saw not emptiness, but another consciousness. We will follow a quiet signal, touch a ship that was never built, and attempt to understand a language that has no words. This is a lullaby about the greatest discovery, told in a whisper. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to leave a like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here, one sleepy soul after another. And now, just breathe. Allow your eyes to grow heavy and your mind to soften. Let us begin. It all began not with a roar, but with a silence deeper than cosmos itself. Astrophysical instruments tuned to capture the cosmic microwave background radiation registered an anomaly, a perfect spherical region in which there was nothing. No background noise, no random gamma-ray bursts, no starlight. It was not mere emptiness, but an active, absolute absence of everything, as if someone had carefully cut out a fragment of reality with an eraser made of pure nothingness. It absorbed any signal, any echo, becoming a black spot on the variegated map of the universe. This was not a void, but a forced nullification, a silence that listened. And from this listening void, a single note was born, having neither pitch nor timbre. It was not a sound in the conventional sense. It was a gravitational wave, a perfect sinusoid, repeating with mathematical precision every 11.3 seconds. It did not weaken with distance, violating the inverse square law. It simply was, everywhere and simultaneously, like the pulse of space-time itself. Astronomers named it the heartbeat because it felt not like a signal, but like a sign of life, commensurate with the entire cosmos. For the first time in billions of years, the cosmos seemed to have found a steady, calm breath. This cosmic pulse possessed a strange quality. It was absolutely pure. Any natural source of gravitational waves, be it the merger of black holes or neutron stars, leaves behind a chaotic, decaying trail, full of harmonics and distortions, like ripples on water from a thrown stone. This signal, however, was impossibly monochromatic, like the sound of a perfect tuning fork vibrating in a vacuum for eternity. Its purity was so perfect that it was, in itself, information. It did not say, "I am here," but "I am made." It was the first whisper of intelligence, heard not by ears, but by the very fabric of reality. For a long time, the source of this signal remained invisible. It was merely a mathematical abstraction in equations. But one day, a telescope observing a distant galaxy registered a fleeting distortion of light. Something passed between us and a cluster of stars, but it cast no shadow and did not block the light. It bent the light like a lens of incredible purity, yet remained utterly transparent itself. The phenomenon was named the ghostly transit. The object was physically there, but it could not be seen directly, only by its gravitational wake and the way it bent the starlight behind it. It was an invisible thing, its presence revealed only by the altered world around it. It took years to understand that the phantom transit and the heartbeat were one and the same phenomenon. The object emitting the gravitational pulse was the very same invisible lens. It was moving, and moving with purpose, not along the inertial trajectory of a comet or an asteroid, but making smooth, calculated course corrections. Its path led precisely to the center of our solar system, to the cradle of humanity. It wasn't traveling at enormous speed. Its movement was slow, almost ceremonial, as if it didn't want to frighten anyone. This was not an invasion, but the unhurried, delicate approach of a guest who had announced their visit in advance. When the object entered the outer reaches of the solar system, passing the Kuiper belt, it took on a visible form for the first time. It ceased to be transparent and began to slowly condense from the void, like a drop of dew on cold glass at dawn. At first, it was just a faint haze. Then it solidified into a pearlescent, shimmering cloud. Finally, it acquired distinct outlines, a perfect ellipsoid, resembling a giant seed or a polished river stone. Its surface was not metallic or stone. It seemed alive, continuously changing its color from deep indigo to milky white. It did not reflect sunlight, it glowed on its own, with a steady and calm radiance. The ship, if it could be called that, had no external features. No engines, no antennas, no portholes, not a single seam. It was monolithic, like an object that had grown rather than been built. Its surface was smooth on a macro level, but instruments showed that on a micro level it was constantly moving, reconfiguring itself like the skin of a living creature. Billions of nanostructures on its hull formed fractal patterns that slowly flowed and changed like a kaleidoscope. These patterns were not random. They replicated mathematical constants such as pi and the golden ratio, becoming a kind of silent language of geometry. Around the ship there was no ion trail, no exhaust, no thermal radiation that would betray the operation of engines. It moved in absolute silence and purity, simply relocating from one point in space to another. Physicists hypothesized that it was not pushing against space, but interacting with it directly, locally altering its curvature. It was not sailing on the river of space-time, it was becoming the current itself. Its movement was more like a thought moving within a consciousness than a physical object flying through a vacuum. This was not technology, but realized physics of a different order. Approaching Jupiter's orbit, the ship stopped, occupying one of the Lagrange points, a place of gravitational equilibrium. It froze, as if waiting for something, giving us time to get used to its presence. And at that moment, its surface stopped shimmering and became perfectly mirrored. It reflected the entire solar system, the distant, tiny sun, the gas giants with their dance of moons, the asteroid belt. But the reflection was not exact. It was idealized, cleansed of chaos. The orbits of the planets in it were perfect circles, not ellipses. The colors were brighter, more contrasted. It was showing us not what is, but what could be. A perfect, harmonious system. Humanity sent an automated probe to it, a small device, full of our hopes and fears. When the probe came within a few thousand kilometers, the ship reacted. A small fragment detached from its mirrored surface, a drop of liquid light, and rushed towards it. It did not attack the probe, but enveloped it, merged with it for a few moments, and then returned to the ship. After that, the probe fell silent. All its systems shut down. But this was not a malfunction. It was a state of absolute stillness, as if it had simply been asked to stop talking and start listening. After contact with the probe, the ship's surface changed again. The mirror disappeared, and in its place, an image emerged on the ellipsoid. It was a map of the starry sky, but not the one we see from Earth. It was the sky of another galaxy, at the other end of the observable universe. The constellations were alien, unfamiliar, but the laws of their arrangement, the spiral arms, the gravitational clusters, all of it was recognizable. The ship was showing us its home, its point of origin. It wasn't saying, "I have come to you." It was saying, "This is where I came from." It was a gesture of incredible trust, a revealing of its most intimate secret, its origin. The map of the alien galaxy on the ship's surface was not static. It was alive. Stars were slowly born in nebulae, lived out their cycles, and died, flaring up as supernovae. Time on the ship's surface flowed millions of times faster than our own. We were watching the evolution of an entire galaxy compressed into a few hours of Earth time. It was not just an image, but a simulation, a working model. The ship was showing us not a picture, but a process, demonstrating its understanding of the laws of cosmology. It spoke in the language of the universe itself, the language of time, gravity, and light. And it was a lesson that we silently absorbed. Then the image of the galaxy was replaced by something completely different. A highly complex three-dimensional diagram appeared on the surface, resembling a crystal lattice, a neural network, and a musical score all at once. It pulsed and changed in time with the gravitational heartbeat. Mathematicians realized that this was not just a pattern. It was a visualization of multi-dimensional space, an attempt to show us what dimensions beyond our three look like. The ship was trying to expand our perception, to show us a structure of reality that we are incapable of seeing. It was the most abstract and the most profound lesson of all. In response to these silent lectures, humanity decided to send its own signal. Not a complex code, but the simplest and most universal thing we knew, the sequence of prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The radio signal sent from Earth reached the ship. For a moment, its surface, covered in diagrams, froze. And then, it answered. The ship did not repeat our sequence. It continued it. On its surface, light pulses flashed, corresponding to the next prime numbers in the sequence, far beyond what we had sent. It didn't just hear, it understood, and it showed that this language was familiar to it. This exchange of prime numbers was a breakthrough, the first handshake between two minds. After that, humanity began sending more complex concepts: Euclidean geometry, the formula for water, the structure of DNA. The ship absorbed everything, and it responded not with repetition, but with generalization. In response to geometry, it showed topology. In response to chemistry, the physics of subatomic particles. In response to DNA, more complex, self-organizing informational structures. It behaved like a wise teacher who, to our every question, gives an answer that raises us to a new level of understanding, but never provides the final truth. The ship never used sound or radio waves for its answers. Its language was light, geometry, and gravity. It created complex light holograms on its surface that could be observed from all sides. These holograms depicted not objects, but concepts. For example, to explain its propulsion system, it didn't show a blueprint but created a living, pulsating model of space-time, demonstrating how it creates a local fold and moves through it without expending energy. It taught us physics through the poetry of visual images. One day, the ship showed the image of our solar system again, but this time with incredible detail. It showed not only the planets, but every asteroid, every comet, every piece of space debris in Earth's orbit. It created a complete three-dimensional dynamic map of our home in real time. The accuracy of this map surpassed anything our own tracking systems could produce. It was demonstrating that its sensors were capable of seeing matter at a fundamental level, sensing every atom within a radius of billions of kilometers. It knew more about us than we knew ourselves. After demonstrating its awareness, the ship did something unexpected. On the map of the solar system, it highlighted Earth. The image zoomed in, showing continents, oceans, clouds, and then it began to show not geography, but the biosphere, the flows of energy circulating in ecosystems, global currents transferring heat, the seasonal cycles of plant growth, visible as the slow green breath of the planet. It was showing Earth not as a rock flying through space, but as a single, complex, living organism. It saw life where we saw only geology and meteorology. Then the focus shifted even deeper, to the level of invisible connections. The image on the ship's surface showed networks enveloping the planet, which we had only guessed at. mycelial networks of fungi underground, exchanging information between the trees of an entire forest, electrochemical signals in the oceans used by schools of fish and pods of whales to communicate, the complex social structures of insects functioning as a single superorganism. It was showing us a collective intelligence diffused throughout the biosphere. For it, life was not a collection of separate beings, but a continuous informational field. Finally, the ship showed us, but not our cities or our bodies. It showed our noosphere, the totality of all our thoughts, ideas, dreams, and fears, as a shimmering, pulsating energy field surrounding the planet. It visualized the flows of information on the internet, the spread of languages, the birth and death of religions and ideologies. It saw our culture as a living, evolving entity with its own laws and metabolism. This was the most unsettling and most profound of all the revelations. For it, our thoughts were as real and tangible as mountains and oceans. After this demonstration, the ship fell silent for a long time. Its surface became smooth and milky white again, and the gravitational pulse ceased. It just hung in the Lagrange point, silent and motionless. It was a pause given to us for comprehension. It had given us a mirror in which we saw ourselves as part of something immeasurably larger. A living planet, the collective mind of the biosphere, a pulsating noosphere. It forced us to rethink the very concept of self. This silence was its most important lesson, an exam without questions. During this great silence, profound changes took place on Earth. The realization that a higher intelligence was observing us did not cause panic. On the contrary, it brought a strange sense of peace. Petty conflicts and disputes seemed insignificant against the backdrop of a cosmic dialogue. For the first time, humanity felt itself to be a single whole, not in the face of a threat, but in the face of a miracle. We were students in a classroom where the teacher was the universe itself, and this new feeling of unity was the first gift we received from the silent visitor. A few months later, the silence was broken, but this time the ship did not show us diagrams or maps. Not one, but thousands of tiny light probes detached from its surface. They did not fly toward Earth. They scattered throughout the entire solar system, heading for every planet, every moon, every large asteroid. They resembled a swarm of fireflies scattering into the night, or dandelion seeds caught by a stellar wind. This was not a research mission in our understanding. It was something else, more like an act of blessing or sowing. Each of these probes, upon reaching its destination, did not land on the surface. It hovered above it and slowly dissolved, turning into a barely noticeable radiance that was absorbed into the soil, ice, or atmosphere. On Mars, a probe dissolved over the frozen polar caps. On Europa, over the icy crust beneath which an ocean was hidden. On Titan, in its dense methane atmosphere. They took nothing and, it seemed, left nothing behind. It was a gesture whose meaning remained a mystery, a quiet act of cosmic agronomy. However, after some time, the instruments left on these celestial bodies began to detect anomalies. On Mars, seismographs registered faint, rhythmic tremors, unlike Marsquakes. In Venus's atmosphere, complex organic molecules appeared that could not have formed there naturally. Europa's subsurface ocean began to emit a weak, coherent radio signal at a specific frequency. The probes had not been empty. They carried seeds, not of life, but of complexity. They initiated processes that were meant to lead to the emergence of something new millions of years later. The ship, as it turned out, was not just an explorer. It was a gardener, a cosmic gardener who travels from system to system, not to find life, but to initiate it. It did not interfere with an already existing biosphere, like on Earth, respecting its sovereignty, But on dead, yet potentially habitable worlds, it left catalysts that were meant to start the long, slow process of evolution. Its mission was calculated for geological epochs, and we were merely witnesses to one of its countless acts of creation. While the seed probes were doing their work, the main ship changed again. Its surface became transparent like crystal, revealing what was inside. At its very center, for the first time, the pilot became visible. But it was not a creature of flesh and blood. It was a spherical concentration of light, a complex, multi-layered structure of luminous filaments woven into an ever-changing pattern. It resembled a star's core, a human brain, and a galaxy in miniature all at once. It was pure intellect, having taken the form of light, a being for whom body and ship were one and the same. This consciousness of light within the ship began to interact with us directly, not through images on its surface, but through direct influence on our instruments. Data coming from telescopes and satellites began to self-organize into meaningful patterns. Streams of zeros and ones formed complex mathematical theorems that we had not yet proven. Spectral analyses of distant stars arranged themselves into musical harmonies. The being was communicating with us using our own tools, turning scientific data into art and poetry. It never tried to speak in human language. It understood that words were too ambiguous and limited, like shadows on a cave wall. Instead, it used the universal languages of mathematics, music, and physics. Once, it transmitted a sequence that was simultaneously a solution to a most complex equation in string theory, a musical piece in the dodecaphonic technique, and the code for a self-assembling nanostructure. It was a message that each field of human knowledge could interpret in its own way, and each interpretation was correct. At one point, the being inside the ship focused its attention on the human probe that was drifting silently nearby. It did not repair or activate it. Instead, it used it as a relay, as a passive mirror. Through the probe's antenna, a single, very complex but very faint signal was sent to Earth. It was not information. It was a structure. When scientists analyzed it, they realized it was a detailed instruction for creating a quantum computer based on entirely different principles than our own. It did not give us the technology. It gave us the knowledge of how to create it ourselves. This gift was an act of incredible wisdom. By giving us ready-made technology, the being would have made us dependent, like fledglings waiting for food in a nest. By giving us fundamental knowledge, it gave us the opportunity to grow. It was the gesture not of a parent giving a child a toy, but of a teacher giving a student a difficult problem. It showed that it believed in our potential, in our ability to understand and create, not just to consume. And in that, there was far more respect than in any material gift it could have offered. Then the being showed us itself. Not its luminous form, but its history. A new panorama unfolded on the ship's surface, an epic spanning billions of years. We saw a star being born from a primordial cloud of gas and dust in an ancient galaxy. Then we saw a planet forming around this star, with oceans of liquid methane and silicon continents. We saw the first life emerge in these cold oceans, not based on carbon, but on silicon, in the form of self-replicating crystalline structures. We saw silicon life evolve, creating cities like giant geodes connected by networks of light. We saw them explore their planet, their system, their galaxy. They did not build mechanical ships. They learned to grow them from single crystals, programming their structure at the atomic level. Their technology was indistinguishable from biology. Their machines were alive. They did not conquer space. They became a part of it, harmoniously weaving themselves into its fabric like a pattern into a carpet. Then we saw their next evolutionary step, their greatest achievement. They realized that a physical body, even a silicon one, is a limitation, a prison for consciousness. And they made the great transition. They learned to transfer their consciousness from their crystalline bodies into stable structures of pure light, becoming immortal, energetic beings. The ships they grew became their new bodies, mobile and eternal. We were observing the birth of the very being that was now before us. It showed us that it was not alone. There were billions of them. After the Great Transition, they did not remain in their home galaxy, turning it into a paradise for themselves. They became wanderers, explorers, gardeners. They dispersed throughout the universe, each with its own mission, but united by a common goal: to observe, catalog, and gently nudge the evolution of complexity wherever possible. They were the living memory of the universe, its self-awareness, and our guest was just one of a countless multitude. This revelation changed everything. We understood that our contact was not a unique event, but part of a grand, universal process. We were not chosen. We were simply lucky that one of these ancient gardeners was passing by and noticed the timid flowers of intelligence in our garden. This knowledge was both humbling and inspiring. We were not the center of creation, but merely one of countless sprouts in an infinite garden. But this garden was carefully tended, and that gave hope. After this story about itself, the being turned its attention back to Earth. The image on the ship showed the history of humanity, but not as we know it. It showed not wars or rulers, but the history of ideas. It showed how the idea of the wheel spread across the world like a virus, how the concept of zero, born in India, changed mathematics, how the scientific method, which originated in Europe, transformed our understanding of reality. It saw our history as the evolution of memes, informational units fighting for survival in our collective consciousness. It also showed our dark sides, but without judgment. Wars and genocide appeared on its display as informational pathologies, like viruses in the noosphere that caused the system to attack itself. Hatred and fanaticism were shown as destructive, self-perpetuating algorithms that hindered the growth of overall complexity. It was the gaze of a doctor looking at a case history, not a judge passing sentence. And this detached yet compassionate gaze was healing. It relieved us of some of our guilt, turning it into a problem to be solved. Then it showed a possible future. Not one, but many branching paths, like the delta of a river flowing into the ocean of eternity. We saw a future where we destroy ourselves in a nuclear war. On the display, it looked like a sharp collapse of the noosphere's entire complexity to zero. We saw a future where we stagnate, mired in virtual entertainment. It looked like an endless, meaningless cycle. But we also saw other paths where we venture into space, where we solve environmental problems, where our consciousness unites into a global, harmonious network. It did not tell us which path to choose. It simply showed a map and said, "Here is the territory. Here are the possible routes. The choice is yours." This was the highest degree of respect for our free will. He was not a messiah who came to save us. He was a navigator who showed us the stars and placed a compass in our hands. And where to sail, we had to decide for ourselves. It was the most difficult and most important of his gifts, the gift of responsibility. After the demonstration of the future, the ship began to prepare for its departure. Its surface once again became milky white, smooth, impenetrable, hiding the being of light within. The gravitational pulse, the very heartbeat, resumed, but this time its frequency began to slowly decrease and its amplitude to fade. It was like a fading echo, like a farewell. It did not leave suddenly. Its departure was as slow and ceremonial as its arrival, giving us time to say goodbye. Before finally departing, it made a final gesture. It turned so that its mirrored surface once again reflected the Earth. But this time it did not idealize anything. It reflected our planet as it is, with its chaotic weather systems, asymmetrical continents, with the scars from our activities. And then, in the center of this reflection, it projected a single tiny but perfectly symmetrical image, a hydrogen atom, the simplest building block of the universe. This was its final message, its philosophical testament. It was as if it were saying, "From this simple beginning arose all this incredible, chaotic, beautiful complexity. Remember your roots. Remember that at the foundation of everything lies a simple and elegant harmony." It was a call to seek beauty in complexity and to remember the simplicity from which it is born. And with this parting image, this quiet reminder, it began to slowly move away from us. The ship did not engage its engines. It simply began to dissolve into space, becoming more and more transparent. First, it turned into a pearlescent haze, then into a barely perceptible distortion of light, like hot air over a road, and then it disappeared completely. The only thing that remained of it was the fading gravitational pulse, which grew slower and slower until it finally merged with the background noise of space. The silence with which it all began returned, but this was a different silence. This new silence was not empty. It was filled with meaning, memories, and unspoken questions. Space ceased to be a hostile or indifferent void for us. It became a home, full of invisible gardeners, ancient wanderers, and hidden possibilities. We were no longer alone. This knowledge changed our psychology, our culture, our religion. We became a civilization that conversed with the stars, and this dialogue now continued within us. In the place where the ship had been, at the Lagrange point, something strange remained. The space in this location was different. The laws of physics there were slightly altered. Planck's constant had a slightly different value. The speed of light was a fraction of a percent lower. It hadn't just flown away, it had left behind an imprint, a scar on the fabric of reality. This place became a shrine for scientists, a constant reminder that the laws of the universe are not as immutable as we thought. It was its signature, left on the canvas of being. Humanity began a project to decipher the gift, the schematics for a quantum computer. It took decades, but when it was finally built, it opened new horizons for us. It allowed us to model complex systems that were previously inaccessible: climate, economics, even human consciousness. It didn't provide answers, but it gave us the ability to ask the right questions. It was a tool not for calculation, but for understanding, a microscope for studying complexity. The effects of the seeds left on other planets only began to manifest centuries later. On Mars, crystalline structures resembling a forest of quartz began to grow from beneath the ground, slowly changing the composition of the atmosphere, making it denser. In the ocean of Europa, complex, self-replicating molecules emerged, the first precursors of silicon-based life. The solar system was slowly transforming into a garden. We became not just observers, but guardians of this garden, responsible for its future. The contact also changed our relationship with our own planet. Seeing Earth through the eyes of an alien, as a single breathing organism, we began to treat it with greater reverence. Environmental movements ceased to be marginal and became the foundation of new global policy. We realized that by destroying the biosphere, we were destroying a part of our own extended consciousness. We began to heal our planet as one would heal a sick but beloved relative. Art and music were also transformed. Artists tried to depict the invisible, poets to describe silence, composers to set gravitational waves and mathematical constants to music. A new genre emerged, cosmic lyricism, an attempt to express the awe and humility that humanity felt in the face of infinity. Culture became deeper, more complex, more reflective. It matured along with us. The most profound change was the change in the perception of time. Having seen the history of the galaxy compressed into a few hours and understanding that the gardener's mission was designed for eons, we realized the fleetingness of our own lives and even the history of our species. This did not cause despair. On the contrary, it gave each moment incredible value. We learned to live in the present. Because we understood that it is the only thing we have, eternity taught us to value the instant. Humanity did not receive any superweapons or secrets of eternal life from the aliens. The greatest gift they left us was perspective. They gave us the opportunity to look at ourselves from the outside, from a distance of 1 billion kilometers and 1 billion years. And in this new light, we saw not our weaknesses, but our uniqueness, not our sins, but our potential. They did not change us. They helped us become ourselves, true Earthlings. Sometimes, gazing into the night sky, astronomers still detect faint residual fluctuations in the gravitational field. It is the echo of that very heartbeat that once brought the entire world to a standstill. It is a quiet reminder that the universe is alive, that it is full of intelligence, and that we are an inalienable part of it. And this knowledge is the best lullaby of all, a whisper from the cosmos, lulling our fears to sleep. There was not a single word, not a single text on the ship's surface. All contact was built on universal symbols. This made humanity realize that language is not just words, but also forms, patterns, rhythms. Linguists began to study the language of geometry, and musicians, the grammar of light. We understood that to communicate with another intelligence, we must step outside our own verbal cage and speak the language of reality itself, which is understood by one and all. One of the most striking demonstrations was the depiction of a black hole. But the ship showed not only its event horizon, but also what was inside. It was not a singularity, as we had assumed, but a complex informational structure, a kind of hard drive for the universe, where information about everything that had fallen into it was stored. Black holes turned out to be not graves, but archives, preserving the history of the cosmos in a compressed form. This knowledge overturned our entire cosmology and gave hope that information never disappears without a trace. After contact with the human probe, it didn't just fall silent, it changed on a molecular level. The metal of its hull acquired the properties of superconductivity at room temperature. The silicon chips reconfigured into a neuromorphic network capable of learning. The ship didn't break our device, it upgraded it, revealing the potential hidden within the very same materials we had used. It transformed a primitive calculator into a thinking crystal, using only a touch of light. The ship also showed us other forms of life it had encountered in its travels. Gas clouds possessing a collective consciousness in the atmospheres of gas giants. Living oceans of sulfuric acid covering entire planets. Beings living in the plasma of stars whose thoughts were electromagnetic storms. None of these life forms resembled us, but they were all united by one thing, the drive toward complexity, toward knowledge, toward being. The universe turned out to be far more alive than we could have ever imagined. Interestingly, the ship never showed images of the beings who created these civilizations. It showed their cities, their art, their scientific achievements, but not the beings themselves. This was another act of delicacy, a lesson against xenophobia. It was as if it were saying that appearance does not matter. What is important is not the form of the body, but the content of the consciousness. It taught us to judge not by the shell, but by the trace that intelligence leaves in the universe, by the songs that it sings. One of the most subtle messages was the demonstration of Brownian motion. First, it showed the chaotic movement of dust motes in a drop of water, and then Very slowly, it began to introduce a weak, coherent field into this system, and the chaos began to self-organize. The dust motes began to arrange themselves into complex fractal patterns. It was showing us that order is born not from a struggle against chaos, but from a gentle guiding influence upon it. This was a metaphor for its own mission, to be not a dictator, but a conductor. When the ship showed the history of Earth, it paid special attention to the moments of mass extinctions, but it depicted them not as tragedies, but as reboots of the biosphere, as moments when old, inefficient systems collapse to make way for new, more complex ones. Even in death and destruction, it saw the potential for creation and renewal. This was a view of life from the perspective of geological time, where there is no good and evil, but only evolution and the eternal dance of change. The ship possessed a sense that could be called gravitational sight. It did not see light, it sensed mass. To it, a planet was not a colored sphere, but a complex symphony of gravitational fields, a dense core, a lighter mantle, a thin film of oceans and atmosphere. It perceived the world as the music of masses, and its gravitational pulse was not a signal, but its way of speaking in this language native to it, the language of density and attraction. One of the light probes sent to Saturn did not dissolve. It passed through its rings, and afterward the particles of ice and dust in the rings began to arrange themselves into incredibly complex, constantly changing patterns resembling Sanskrit mandalas. Saturn's rings ceased to be a mere accumulation of debris and turned into a gigantic work of kinetic art, visible from Earth. It was its gift, having no practical use but full of aesthetic meaning, pure art for art's sake. The ship revealed that its creators were not the first intelligent race in their galaxy. They themselves had been seeded by an even more ancient civilization that had long since vanished, leaving behind only an echo in the structure of the vacuum. They were but one link in an infinite chain of transmitting life and knowledge. This idea of cosmic succession deeply influenced humanity. We understood that our task is not only to develop ourselves, but also, one day, perhaps, to become gardeners for other younger worlds. The Wanderer never showed any emotions in the human sense. No joy, no anger, no curiosity. Its state could be described as active contemplation. It was like a perfect mirror, reflecting everything without distortion or judgment. But within this very impartiality, the deepest form of love was felt. A love not for an object, but for the very process of being, for the dance of complexity and chaos. It was the compassion of a Buddha multiplied by the power of a galaxy. After the ship's departure, a new scientific field emerged on Earth: xenopsychology, an attempt to model and understand a mind based on different principles. Scientists tried to imagine how a being of light thinks, for whom time and space are not barriers, but variables in an equation. This discipline became a bridge between physics, neurobiology, and philosophy, compelling us to ask the most fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness. The most difficult thing to understand was its relationship with information. For it, information was not just a description of reality, but its fundamental property, on par with mass and energy. When it showed us the structure of DNA, it simultaneously showed the mathematical formula that describes it. For it, the object and its description were one and the same. The world was a text that it knew how to read, and it was teaching us the rudiments of this universal literacy. The ship moved without acceleration. It neither sped up nor slowed down. It would simply disappear at one point and reappear at another, several meters from the previous one. It was a discrete form of movement, more akin to a change of frames in a film than to flight. It did not travel through space. It reassembled itself at different points within it, violating our intuitive understanding of continuity. It didn't fly, it was simply here, then there. When the ship reflected the Earth, the reflection was devoid of sound. We saw hurricanes, volcanic eruptions, bustling cities, but all of it occurred in absolute silence. This technique forced us to focus on the visual, structural component of phenomena, discarding the emotional noise they usually evoke. It taught us to see the essence of things, not just react to their external manifestations. It was meditation on a planetary scale. Despite all its power, the ship was incredibly fragile. Instruments showed that its hull was only a few hundred atoms thick. Its strength was not in armor, but in its ability for instantaneous regeneration and adaptation. It was not a fortress, but a living cell, constantly renewing its membrane. This was a philosophy of strength through flexibility, not rigidity. A lesson that true resilience lies in the ability to change, not in resistance. During contact with the human probe, the ship didn't just download information from it. It left its own on the probe's storage media. When scientists were able to access the probe's memory, they found not data, but a single file. It was a three-dimensional model of the ship itself, its complete genetic map. It left us its blueprint, its genome, like a seed from which we might one day be able to grow something similar when we are ready for it. The Wanderer showed us that the death of a star is not an end, but a beginning. A supernova explosion, according to its version, was not an act of destruction, but an act of dispersal. A star, in dying, scatters heavy elements across the cosmos, from which new planets and new life are later formed. Death was a necessary condition for birth, an exhale that is followed by an inhale. And in this cycle, it saw the supreme harmony of the universe, its perpetual motion machine. Not once during the entire contact did the ship use anything that could be interpreted as a weapon. It did not defend itself when our probe approached it. It did not react to military radars that tried to probe it. Its invulnerability was based not on the ability to destroy, but on the complete absence of anything that could be attacked. It was like water which cannot be punched, or like a thought which cannot be caught in a net. Just before its departure, the ship momentarily altered its gravitational pulse. Instead of a perfect sinusoid, it generated a complex wave that was an exact gravitational copy of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. It had found this fragment in the chaos of our radio transmissions, recognized the structure and harmony within it, and translated it into its own language. It was its way of saying, "I hear your beauty," a recognition that our art is also a part of the universal harmony. The Wanderer demonstrated the concept of negative entropy, or negentropy. It showed how in a closed system, contrary to the second law of thermodynamics, order could spontaneously increase if the system possessed information about itself. Life and reason, in its view, were not an anomaly but a fundamental property of the universe, its way of combating heat-death. We were not an accident but a necessity, part of the cosmos's plan for self-discovery. The ship was capable of interacting with time. It showed us a short episode from Earth's past, the birth of the moon as a result of a collision with the hypothetical planet Theia. We saw this not as a simulation, but as a real window into the past. It could not change the past, but it could read it by accessing the information imprinted in the very structure of space-time. For it, time was not a river, but a landscape that could be explored. Among the many branches of the future that it showed, there was one where humanity never went into space. We remained on Earth, having created a perfect, harmonious but closed society. On the ship's display, this branch looked like a beautiful but frozen crystal, incapable of further growth. It did not condemn this path, but showed that it led to the cessation of evolution. It was a quiet critique of isolationism, a reminder that life is movement. The light being inside the ship was not a single entity. The instruments showed that it consisted of billions of individual points of consciousness, working in unison like neurons in a brain or bees in a hive. It was a collective consciousness where individuality was not lost, but became part of a greater whole, enriching it. It was simultaneously one and many, resolving the paradox of the individual and the collective that had so long plagued human philosophy. The ship showed us that dark matter is not just an inert mass holding galaxies together. It is a kind of nervous system of the universe, a framework along which gravitational signals are transmitted over super long distances. Galaxies, according to its version, were not just clusters of stars, but nodes in this cosmic neural network, exchanging information over eons. The cosmos was not just vast, it was intelligent at the most fundamental level. Its silence was as informative as its demonstrations. When it was silent, it was not just waiting, it was listening. Its sensors at that time were reading all the information emanating from Earth, from radio waves to seismic vibrations, from the chemical composition of the atmosphere to the patterns in our dreams, which were reflected in the global electromagnetic field. It was compiling our complete portrait to understand us in a way we did not understand ourselves. In response to our DNA structure, it showed us something that could be called the DNA of space-time. It was a fundamental formula describing how, from the quantum foam, from the boiling void, the basic properties of reality are born: dimensionality, curvature, the arrow of time. It showed us the code of the universe's operating system, the source text on which all that exists is written, and this text was at once simple and infinitely complex. The ship was absolutely cold. Its temperature was equal to the temperature of the cosmic microwave background, about 3 degrees Kelvin. All of its activity produced no excess heat. This spoke to the 100% efficiency of its energy processes, to a perfect thermodynamic cycle. It was a perfect machine, not losing a single joule of energy to waste, the embodiment of any engineer's dream. It lived without leaving a thermal trace. One of the most poetic images it created was the image of a library of stardust. It showed how every speck of dust, traveling through space, carries the imprints of all the environments it has been in, the spectral signature of its parent star, the isotopic composition of the nebula in which it cooled. Each speck of dust was a book, and it knew how to read these books, reconstructing the history of the galaxy from them. The entire cosmos was an open chronicle to it. The ship did not perceive us as humans. It perceived us as a complex system producing a unique type of information, narrative, stories. To it, our civilization was, above all, a gigantic machine for the production of meanings. And it was these meanings, not our bodies or technologies, that were of the greatest interest to it. It was a collector not of artifacts, but of the stories that universes tell about themselves. Approaching the sun, the ship did not shield itself from its radiation. It unfurled its structure, becoming like a giant flower of light, and began to absorb the energy of the solar wind, using it for regeneration and reconfiguration. It did not fight the star, it fed on it, as a plant feeds on light. To it, the star was not a threat, but a source of life, and it showed us how one can live in harmony with even the most powerful forces of nature. Its parting gesture with the hydrogen atom had another, deeper meaning. It showed how from a single proton and a single electron, the entire diversity of chemistry is born. But then it showed how from a single simple rule in a cellular automaton, infinite complexity is born, imitating life. This was a lecture on the power of emergence, on how complex worlds are born from simple laws, and how we ourselves are a product of this great principle. The final fading pulse of its heartbeat was not identical to the previous ones. It contained an encoded message, its postscript. When it was deciphered, it turned out to be simple, yet profound. It was a map of our own galaxy, the Milky Way, and on it was marked a single solitary point, not its home, but the next star on its route. It didn't just leave, it told us where it was going, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs behind. After its departure, a new word appeared in human language, solasno, from the Latin solus, alone, and the verb to accord. It meant a feeling of deep, non-verbal understanding that arises from contact with something completely different, yet fundamentally kindred. It was a word for the feeling experienced by everyone who watched the silent dialogue with the Wanderer, a feeling of solitary unity with the universe. The ship possessed the ability of self-replication, but it never used it. It showed a simulation in which it creates copies of itself, and they quickly fill the entire galaxy, turning it into a homogeneous, ordered structure. And then it showed how this structure collapses because it lacks diversity, lacks chaos, lacks anything new. This was its silent critique of imperialism and expansion, a lesson that life thrives in diversity. He showed that consciousness is not necessarily tied to the brain. He demonstrated a model in which consciousness arises in a complex system of vortices in the atmosphere of a gas giant. Thought, according to his version, was not a product of biology, but a property of any sufficiently complex and self-regulating system. The universe was full of intelligence, but we were looking for it in the wrong forms, expecting to see our own reflection, and not something completely different. One of his strangest actions was a brief, focused gravitational influence on the moon. He slightly altered its orbit by only a few centimeters. This was enough to make total solar eclipses impossible thousands of years from now. The meaning of this gesture remained a mystery. Perhaps it was a signature, or perhaps he considered the perfect coincidence of the solar and lunar disks too great a chance, one that needed to be corrected by introducing a slight dissonance into the perfect harmony. The most important thing we understood was that the universe is neither hostile nor friendly. It simply is. But within its very existence, in its laws, lies the potential for the birth of intelligence, complexity, and beauty. And the task of intelligence is not to conquer the universe, but to understand it and become its mirror. The Wanderer was such a mirror, and he taught us to be one as well, reflecting eternity in the fragile vessel of our consciousness. Thus ended this quiet rendezvous in the void. It left behind neither glory nor fear, only a deep, ringing silence filled with new meaning. Humanity had peered over the edge of the known and discovered there not monsters or gods, but an infinitely patient gardener whose planning horizons are measured in eternity. And we understood that our journey is only just beginning. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, I invite you to leave a like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. And now, just breathe. Let your eyes grow heavy and let the quiet signals from the depths of space lull your thoughts. Good night.